Dave Talks Comics, Episode 79, HeroesCon 2015, Part 3. Welcome to Dave Talks Comics, a program on the subjects of comic books, cartoons, and comic book conventions. I talk about comic books I have read, cartoons I have watched, and comic book conventions that I've gone to. I talk from my notes. I don't go panel by panel or scene by scene. I try to do more than just summarize the stories. This program is not spoiler-free. Although in this episode, I'm not going to be talking about anything that would be spoiled, so I'm just going to dispense with the rest of that disclaimer. On this episode, I will be talking about Day 2 of HeroesCon. That's Saturday. And I'll be talking about what I had for breakfast, some of the people I talked to, like Marcus Currie, Scott Fogg and Marc Thomas, Mike Maihack, Craig Rousseau, and I'll be talking about some other stuff, too, like the Janson Fiffe panel, releasing or have already released, depending on when you're listening to this, my recording of that panel. Also, the horror panel. I'll be talking about some other stuff that I bought, what I had for lunch, what I had for dinner, and also I kind of talk a little bit about the pressure to buy that I often feel at conventions. I think I'm ready to talk about Day 2 of HeroesCon. When I started to think about this, and I started to think about what I had done and what I had seen and notes I had taken, I didn't think I had as much to talk about as I did after I had written out my notes again, because that's what I do during the day. I've been keeping, I have scraps of paper with me. Actually, I have old envelopes, and I write notes on the backs of these old envelopes while I'm at panels, when I'm taking a break somewhere. I make notes on people I've talked to, things I've bought, things I've seen, just so I can try and keep straight what order I did them in, although I wasn't entirely successful on that today. And let's see, what order I did them in, and, what I bought, and what I saw, and whom I saw, because I didn't do as good a job today at keeping track of all that, but these are my notes, these are what they are, and probably most of this is going to be on the panels, but we'll see. So this morning I slept in a little longer than I did on Friday morning. I skipped the hotel buffet breakfast, and I went to Tryon House, which is a diner-type place. It doesn't really look like a diner from the outside, but on the inside it certainly does. And I went there last year one day for breakfast, and so I went there again today. And I had, what did I have, scrambled eggs and bacon and grits and muffins and apple juice. Is that it? I think that was it. And it was good. It was good. I was surprised at how much they gave me in the way of grits. But I ate it all, and it was all very good, and it was extremely reasonably priced. I think I over-tipped by accident, but I think I did. I think I might have even tipped something like 40% by accident. But I didn't realize it until I was signing the receipt, and I didn't want to say anything then. And it wasn't that much money to begin with anyway, so they'll probably love me if I go back there again tomorrow for breakfast. So I didn't get to the show. The show opened earlier today than it did yesterday. Yesterday the show opened at 11. Today it opened at 10. By the time I got there, it was like 10:30. Unfortunately, the trains don't run as frequently, the Lynx train, on the weekends. I think it only runs like every half hour. And I had obviously just missed the train because there was hardly anybody waiting for the train. And, and there was a bunch of traffic coming out of the hotel parking lot, the road that the hotel is near. And so I ended up taking a roundabout route to get to the train station. I went probably 3 times as far as I needed to, and it's possible I should have just gone the other way, but I just wasn't sure with the lights and everything how long it was going to take me to make that left turn. And once I made the left turn, it probably wouldn't have been that bad. But I even had trouble getting out of the parking lot, the hotel parking lot, onto the street. That's how backed up the traffic was. So I wandered around the first thing I did was I went to the place where they were doing the screen printed T-shirts, the Fine Print Shop. According to the program guide, there's the ones who do it. The Fine Print Shop. They were the ones who were doing all the convention T-shirts and a bunch of other T-shirts. It was $20 for the Indie Island T-shirts. They had a color T-shirt, which I didn't see in the program guide, which was burgundy, and I really liked that color. So I got a burgundy shirt, and the lettering is gold. And it's Apocalyptic Girl is the name of the character on the front. And I don't know anything about it, so I should probably try and stop by his table, Andrew McLean's table, and maybe buy an issue of the comic, or maybe just check out his website. So after that, I wandered around in the low end of Artists Alley. I picked up various business cards here and there. I talked to a few people. For the most part, I don't remember who they are. I do have some business cards, but I don't see the point. I don't really remember the sales pitches they were giving me. If they had really appealed to me, I think I would have remembered them or something about them. And honestly, some of their business cards aren't that helpful. A lot of them will have like a QR code that you can scan and will take you to their website. But I didn't feel like taking the time to do that. The one table that I did stop at, and that the person got me intrigued enough that I actually ended up buying something. It's a book called Sons of Darkness. The guy I talked to is the writer, and his name is Marcus Currie. The artist wasn't there. Her name is Jacqueline Diaz, and the company is called Soul Bullet Entertainment. And I get the impression that it's Marcus's company. And this comic book kind of has a supernatural flavor to it. Has something to do with the Garden of Eden, good versus evil. And I don't know, we were talking for 5 or 10 minutes, and I got interested enough. I wasn't blown away by the look of the book, but I've seen much worse. I've definitely seen worse. And it also didn't look like it was trying to... There are a number of comic book companies that basically go heavy on the TNA, and I didn't get that impression either. It did look like there was some sort of story there. And I was intrigued, and I wanted to know more. This issue I bought is just like a primer. It's just like the opening shot, and so like the second half of the book has like character bios, although some of the characters are kind of left somewhat mysterious. And so I'm going to read it, and we'll see what it's like. It's just a comic book. It's not a graphic novel, but they do have graphic novels planned, and I think they said the first one is supposed to be out in December of this year, and the next one and I assume these are more than just 32-page issues, but I don't know. I'm not sure. Possibly the next table I stopped at. I wandered around a lot. and I can't remember exactly when I did these things, but possibly the next table I stopped at was that of Comfort, Love, and Adam Withers. And I should say that I think in the previous recording I called them Comfort and Adam Love, and that was incorrect. It's Comfort, Love, and Adam Withers, and they are a couple. They did a commission for me of Odin, just a head sketch. It was supposed to be just a pencil sketch, although in looking at it, it really does look like there was some ink in there. They did a beautiful job, and Adam actually explained to me how he worked the Tree of Life, the Yggdrasil, into Odin's helmet, and also the Raven into his eye patch. And so it's really cool, and I will, of course, be posting. Well, probably by the time this is released, I'll have already posted a picture of that. At that point, let's see. At that point, I think I went to the Janson and Fiffe panel. And I should say, I learned at this panel that his last name is pronounced Fiffe. I always assumed it was Fiffe because there's no accent over the E, but of course this is English, and we usually don't put accents over letters in English. So, my bad. And apparently his friends he likes his friends to call him Mike as well, instead of Michel, because Michel, of course, is French for Michael. The panel was sparsely attended. It wasn't quite as bad as the iconic Heroes panel that I attended on Friday, where there was like 4 people in the audience and 4 people on stage. It might have been like 20 people or maybe 25, but I mean the room could have held a couple hundred at least. Maybe 300, I'm not sure. And the moderator was Greg Matiasevich, I think that's how he pronounces his name. Something close to that. The panel was supposed to be a conversation between Klaus, Janson, and Michel Fiffe, but I think that Klaus did considerably more talking than Michel did, and occasionally Greg entered the conversation to ask a question or possibly to direct the conversation. Early in the conversation, they were talking about their own work, about how tight their own work is and how they would describe each other's work. And there was some disagreement between the two over how tight they're doing it and how much they like their own work, that sort of thing. That both of them, as I think is often the case, they're both their own harshest critics, and they both see shortcomings in their work and wish that their work was either tighter or looser than it is. Then they got into a discussion of inking is drawing, and this is something that Michel brought up. And Klaus talked about working with various pencilers, including Dennis Cowan and John Romita Jr., and he also praised Michel for doing his own work, for inking his own stuff, and also for going his own way with self-publishing, basically. Although I don't think he entirely self-publishes. I think he has, well, I don't know. It depends on exactly what the definition of self-publishing is, but he doesn't go through a big publisher. And then, which led to Michel talking about breaking in and how tough it was to break into the business, and how one of his biggest mistakes was trying to impress the gatekeepers, the talent scouts, or the people who he needed to impress to get work at DC and Marvel. And that once he stopped doing that, how that everything seemed to go much better for him. And I guess that's when he started to get some recognition for his work. Klaus talked about how he's been accused of being too precious with his work, and which he defended as he says that he's gotten better over the years, but and that there's some truth to it, but it's more that he has standards for his own work, and that he wants those standards to be upheld. and he doesn't feel comfortable just releasing something when people feel that it's ready. It's more a matter of when he's ready to release something. He talked about, his longevity. He talked about how he takes the long view of things. He talked about his contributions to the industry as a penciler, as an inker, as a writer, as a teacher. And I don't think he was bragging here. I think it was more of him trying to emphasize the need to be multi-talented, to offer more than just one specific skill as an artist in the comic book industry. And that he didn't want to, primarily because, at least in his own personal case, he didn't want to be pushed out of the business. He wants to be there until the very end, until the end of his life. He said he doesn't want to retire gracefully. He wants to be pushed out. There was a little bit of talk about the paper and how the paper and the technology has changed and how that has affected his work. And once again, this is Klaus talking. He told some stories about Dick Giordano, about Rich Buckler, and about and Frank Miller, and getting started in the business, and how he got started in the business, how he got his first professional jobs. Then they got into a discussion of collaboration, and this was a recurring theme, and there were some audience questions later which also brought it up. Michel said he prefers to work alone, and then Klaus got into this, talked a little bit about art school and how art school doesn't exactly encourage collaboration. And that led into a bit of not a rant, but definitely a peeve, or maybe rant is the right word, where he was talking about how he feels that a lot of pencilers these days are prima donnas. And I believe that's the exact word he used. And that they try to control the process too much. But then that also led to control the process too much as far as the inkers go. In other words, that they almost want the inkers just to be tracers, I think is what he's saying, as opposed to the inker actually adding something to the artwork, adding something to the look. And I may not be well educated enough to know the terminology to use, but if you look at a penciled page and then you look at the page after it's been inked, you normally can see a difference in the look. The inkers the inkers should add something. They should be doing more than just tracing the work that the penciler has already laid down. And in some cases, the pencils, of course, are very loose, and it's more than just a matter. It's definitely more than a matter of just tracing. That they have to do more. They have to flesh out more. And sometimes, I don't know if they still use this term, but sometimes you would see the term embellisher instead of inker in comic books. And I think that gets better at the idea of what an inker has to offer. And he talked about how Jack Kirby's various inkers changed the look of his work, and how you can see from different stages in Kirby's career. I mean, I think especially in the 60s and 70s would be my guess, and maybe even into the 80s, how the various inkers affected his work. Although these are all Klaus's examples, I can't off the top of my head think of how these different inkers affected Kirby's work and the differences and what they did. Klaus also talked about how tight scripts were not good, and how there's too much of a tight scripting these days. And I think he would prefer a return to the days of the Marvel style, where the writer, where it was more collaborative, where the writer would give the penciler a story, but he wouldn't say, okay, this should be on this panel, and this should be on this panel, and this should be on this panel. He would leave it up to the penciler to determine that, to determine the pace of the story and how the story is told. And maybe he wouldn't absolutely do that, but he, the writer, wouldn't absolutely do that. But still, there was more collaboration in that sense, as opposed to telling somebody exactly what should be drawn in each panel. And he told a little story about Gene Colan at this point, how you could tell a Gene Colan story, and that relates to the Marvel style of telling stories. And then finally, it wrapped up with some questions from the audience. Sitting in front of me were two of the guys from the Sidebar podcast, Swain Hunt and Adrian Janson. They asked some questions. They weren't the only ones who asked questions, but they did ask some questions. For instance, they asked what elements of past comics do you like? And this was Swain who asked this, do you like or do you want to bring back? And that led into a discussion of how much they liked old comic books from, Michel was saying, from his youth and from before. He talked about the pulp quality of Charlton comics from the 1950s. And neither one of them seemed to care for continuity. Klaus talked about the guerrilla nature, and that's his term, the guerrilla nature, and that's Guerilla, of Charlton comics. Talked a little bit about the corporate control of comics, and I think that's viewed as a negative, definitely. And in terms of continuity, how they really don't care about continuity, and how they don't see all of the innovations that have come in, the developments in paper, as being a good thing. That some of the slick paper they really don't like. Swain also asked, why do some collaborations work so well? And Klaus's response to this was that trust, I don't think he put it exactly this way, but I think he did use the word trust. That trust is at the center of the collaborations that work, and that good personal relationships were important. He also talked about working on Gil Kane's work, and how it wasn't really until the end of Gil Kane's life, until some of the last things that he worked on with Gil Kane, that he really felt like he was doing justice in his inking of Gil Kane's pencils, as opposed to, I suppose he had been collaborating with Gil Kane going all the way back, probably to the 70s, or certainly the early 80s, if not the 70s. Adrian Janson of the Sidebar podcast also asked a question about what kinds of pencilers he works with best, and this is a question you probably should listen to my recording of the podcast if you want to get a better idea of it, because I'm not sure if I could summarize this very well. But there was some talk of shapes and textures, and what sort of a penciler, what sort of approach does the penciler need to take, or talked about pencilers who approach things as, I guess more of maybe design, or, I'm not sure if I'm really getting at this too well, but basically Adrian was asking what kind of approach does he prefer, or penciler's approach does he prefer, or does he work with best? And Klaus seemed to agree with Adrian's assessment of his work, of his collaborations with various pencilers. And then finally there was a question about whether these two guys, Michel Fiffe and Klaus Janson, will ever collaborate. And they seemed to want to collaborate. There was no firm plans, or no firm plans, or even any statement that they've talked about this before or anything like that. But it was a very good panel, and you really should listen to the recording of it if you want to know more. I took extensive notes, and this is a trimmed down version of those notes. I did not talk about all the things that they went into that I took notes on, but it runs about an hour, and it should be available at this point, or very soon available. So I'm very glad I went to this panel, and I don't I can't remember which panels I skipped to go to this one, but this one was definitely worth it. So after this panel, it was a little after 1 o'clock. I wandered around a little bit. Then I decided to go get some lunch. I wasn't sure where to go. The place I went to on Friday was closed because it was only open on weekdays. So I decided to walk to this one place, which was like 5 or 6 blocks away. But then I saw this other place, which was this Irish pub. So I went in there. I asked them if they had any food. They didn't, but they pointed me to this Greek restaurant right across the street. Now the street that they were on, it was like kind of an alleyway, just off of Church Street in downtown Charlotte. So I went to this place called Neffley's, and I had a chicken gyro and a Queen Anne's Revenge, which is a black ale. And I'm not sure how that's different from a porter or a stout. It's made by the Mystery Brewing Company, and they had this on tap, and it was an excellent beer. The bartender, who I think was the manager, because I think he said that he'd given the bartender the day off to go to Heroes Con, or the bartender had taken the day off to go to Heroes Con, or however you want to put it. So we talked a little bit. There was a couple other people at the bar there eating, drinking, but for the most part it was empty. It wasn't full. I mean, it's the middle of the day. This was like 1:30, 2 o'clock on Saturday afternoon. And actually we got to talking. It was kind of funny. It turns out that he is related to the guys who own another Greek place, which is up in my neighborhood. Well, not in the neighborhood I live in, but not too far from where I live. A place called the Big Greek Cafe, which is in Silver Spring, Maryland. And so it it didn't come out immediately, but at one point he said something like, well, there's a lot of Greek places up there in the D.C. area. And I was like, yeah, there are, and like there's this one place I like to go to. And he was like, really? And that's when he told me that they were his cousins. And so that was good. It was a very good meal. It was, in fact, it reminded me a little bit of the food I had at the Big Greek Cafe. The way the pita was made and the way it was wrapped up. It didn't taste exactly like it. And it didn't have a lot of feta on it, now that I think about it. That's interesting, yeah. So afterwards, I only had the one beer. I had the gyro, and I headed back. Some of the other things I did during the rest of the day, I stopped at another table that belonged to Scott Fogg and Marc Thomas. Marc is the artist, and I believe Scott's the writer, although I don't know. They probably collaborate on this to some degree. I doubt that Marc is doing everything. Marc is only doing the art. But Marc had a number of prints out there of characters from Avengers, and his offer was the prints were $10, and which seemed very reasonable. These was like 11 by 17 or something like that, and something like that, maybe 11 by 14. I'm not sure, but the offer was you buy a print and he would do a head sketch for free. So you'd also get a head sketch. So you get a print and a head sketch for $10, which seemed like a very reasonable price. So I picked out the print of Hawkeye and Black Widow, and I asked him to do me a head sketch of Loki, which he did while I waited. And it turned out quite nice. It's a little more cartoony than the one that Jim Terry did for me at Appleseed Con last month, but it's definitely in line with the other stuff he did, and he definitely has a mean, evil look in his eye, which is what I would expect to see. Yeah, it's really nice. One of the tables that I stopped at. The other thing I wanted to say about them was they are working on a comic book, and I cannot remember the name. If I can, I'll try and get it before They don't have it yet, but it's a comic book, something about an alien invasion, and it sounds like something out of a 1960s kind of science fiction type story where everybody knows that there's aliens coming, but they don't, I'm sorry. There's only a couple people who know that aliens are coming to invade the Earth, and they have to fight them off, and nobody believes them, etc., etc. And apparently there's at least one alien character who plays a major role in the story, maybe who's on their side, I'm not sure. But apparently there's a 24-page preview, and there's they have something on Dropbox. I tried to download it on my iPhone. I was having trouble with that, so I'll probably do it once I get home. And maybe at that point I can give you the name for it. It wasn't a short title. It wasn't a super long title, but it was not a short title. And I did talk to them a little bit about The Invaders, the TV series, The Invaders, which I think... No, that wasn't a British TV. I'm pretty sure that was an American TV show. But it ran for 2 seasons in I think it was the late 60s, and it was about the same kind of thing, at least the original premise, that there was these aliens on Earth who were, doing who knows what, but this guy, the main character, is the only one who knows that they're there, and he keeps on seeing these signs that they're there. And then when he punches them, they kind of dissolve. But I saw this show when I was a kid, and I really love it. And I may have talked about it before on this podcast. I can't recall. So one of the other tables that I went to was the SCAD table, the Savannah College of Art and Design, and they had some books out there. And I was flipping through them when one of the people manning the table said, take a book if you want to. So I picked up this one called SCAD Sequences, and it's got all sorts of art from all sorts of different students. Looks really neat. They're free, or they were free at Heroes Con today. I stopped at a couple of podcast tables that were right next to each other. One was a Star Trek themed podcast. I thought I had picked up a business card from them, but I don't have anything now, so I'm not sure what the name was. All I know is that it was a Star Trek themed podcast, and it's a 2-person podcast. I think they do it on a weekly basis. One of them had a portable organ there, and she was playing it. It's all kinds of Trek, so it's not just the original series or Enterprise or Deep Space Nine or Next Generation or the movies. I guess it's everything. I didn't ask them for a blow by blow. What does it include? What doesn't it include? But he said they do reviews of episodes. They talk about episodes, and then they do sometimes top 5 lists or that sort of thing. At the next table, there was a guy from a podcast called the Comics Alternative Podcast. He said basically they cover anything that is not Marvel and DC. And they are both PhDs. He was the only one at the table when I stopped by. They are not PhD. Oh, I'm sorry, they are PhDs. And I think they've got their degrees in English or something like that, or popular culture or something along those lines. I don't think it's specifically in comic books. I stopped by Mike Maihack's table. I think I might have mentioned before that I was thinking about getting him to do me a commission. I asked him about commissions, and his commission list was full at the time. He said I could stop by later, and then I was thinking about it, and I was like, do I really want to spend money on something else? Haven't I spent enough already? But I did buy a print of the Avengers as cats, which I think is going to be a present for my niece. Because I think she likes the Avengers and I think she likes cats, but I'm sure she hasn't seen this before. So I'm not sure if she'll dig it, but we'll see. But it was very reasonably priced. It was $10. It was a big print, which brings up the subject of there was all sorts of, just as there were all sorts of prices for original art, whether that be pages from published comic books or commissions or sketches. The same is true for prints. There were people selling prints that were big prints for $10. There was people selling prints of the same size for $25. Now, I guess not all prints are created alike. You have to consider who the artist is, but you also have to consider the quality of the print, the quality of the paper, the quality of the ink, the quality of the print job. And I'm sure these people pay all sorts of different prices to get these prints made. But that print I got from Andy Suriano on Friday was only $10, and that was frickin' gorgeous. And these prints that I got today were also beautiful. Especially the one from Mike Maihack. It's very nicely done. Now I finally picked up the commission, the last commission that I've gotten so far. This one is by Stephanie Gladden, and this is of Aku and Mr. Burns. And I think of it as a supervillain team-up commission. And she did a great job with it. Aku was a little less dynamic, a little less... I guess I was hoping for something with a little more motion in it, because the last time she did a commission for me, there was quite a bit of motion in it. But I do like it very much. And I do like the idea of teaming the two of them up, although even though they're both evil, I think they're very different characters. Although they both, I guess, are focused on world domination or something like that, although I don't know if Mr. Burns... Well, I'm sure there have been episodes of The Simpsons where he's been focused on world domination. I haven't watched that show in years. Although I do like Futurama. I stopped by Craig Rousseau's table. Craig Rousseau did a sketch of Archangel for me last year, which I still like very much. And I didn't want to go all out and get another full commission, which would have been $50, but for $20 I'm getting a head sketch from him, and I asked him to do a head sketch of Fiffe, and I showed him the commission that Robert Wilson did for me of Fiffe, and he was very impressed by it. So I'll be picking that up tomorrow. And I think the only other thing that I've got here that I did was I went to the horror panel. I also taped this. I have checked the sound quality on both of these, and I think they came out pretty good. You might need to turn up the volume a little bit, but I think they came out fairly well. So I'm just going to run down some of the things that they talked about at the horror panel. I did not go back and listen to the entire horror panel prior to making this recording. I did take a lot of notes, not quite as many notes as I took on the other panel. But, so let's see. So the guy who moderated it, I should talk about who was on the panel first. There was 4 people on the panel plus a moderator. The moderator was Joe Roch. I'm not sure who he is, if he's if he's an employee of Heroes Con, or I'm not familiar with the name. But the people on the panel were Tyler Crook, Colin Bunn, Francesco Francavilla, and James Herron. And according to the program guide, Ben Templesmith was also supposed to be on the panel. I think he might have canceled And I don't just mean the panel, but I mean the entire convention. I think he may not have made it to the convention. Trying to remember but anyway, so they talked about all sorts of things. So the moderator opened it up by asking them what makes a horror book successful. And they all kind of offered their 2 cents in. They said things like mood, atmosphere, plot, characters, specifically characters that readers care about. Then they talked a little bit about how to create mood, and the big thing that seemed to come up was pacing and how to control to control how the reader moves through the book, and by implying rather than showing things. And they talked a little bit about, at that point, things. And the classic example that I think of is Alien, about how you don't see the monster, the alien, until the end of the movie. You just know that there's something out there. Of course, that's kind of, if you've seen the pictures of the alien before you see the movie, I don't know, at least for me, it kind of took something out of it. It was hard for me to forget that I knew what it was that was out there. But still, there's definitely something to be said for scaring people with the unknown rather than trying to scare them with something that they do know. They talked about, in that vein, they talked about some of Mike Mignola's comics. They talked about some horror manga, specifically Junji Ito's comics. I've read manga. I have not really read any horror manga. They talked a little bit about how horror mixes well with other genres, like humor. And I guess, other, period pieces and even things like science fiction. And although I'm not really remembering specific genres that they mentioned, I just remember them talking about how horror mixes well with other genres. I don't remember if they specifically said genres or they just said other things. And one of them said, and I believe this was James Heron, or I think it was James Heron who said this, said, we all atone with the void in different ways, which I'm not sure where he gets that from. I'm not sure if that's something he came up with or if he's quoting somebody else. I suppose I could Google it. But, I mean, what I read into that is that he's talking about how we interpret, how we fill in the blanks, how we fill in what the author doesn't show us, whether it's visually or however it's done. What we aren't being told, we all atone with the void in different ways. We all have different things that we want to fill in those empty spaces with. And they talked about playing with the reader's perception of what's coming next. They talked about what they thought were evil things, and Cullen Bunn specifically mentioned trees, that he felt that trees were evil. He talked about, and he talked about people under porches. He talked about how when he was a kid, when he was 6 years old, he was looking out the window. He grew up in a very rural area on a farm. And he talked about looking out the window one day and seeing a guy crawl out from under the porch, under his house, go to a tree, grab an apple, and crawl back under the porch. And it was years before he figured out what it was that he'd seen, apparently. They also talked about making daytime the scary time. And I think if you listen to the panel, I think they talk a little bit more about that. There was a lot of questions from the audience. Somebody asked about found footage films, whether they were good or bad. They talked about what inspired their views of horror. There was questions about, are we getting desensitized to violence? Somebody asked what will be the next horror trope. And I can't remember if this was specifically in response to that, but considering that it comes next in my notes, there's a good chance it was. Cullen Bunn talked about his idea for a story which has not come to life yet, but which has the creature from the Black Lagoon as a detective, but he can't talk. He can only communicate by slapping his flippers or something like that. There was a question about what their preference of horror, whether human horror like serial killers or supernatural horror. Somebody asked, what's the hardest thing to twist or to pervert, to make evil, I guess, which I don't know if they really they came to any sort of consensus on that, or even offered any suggestions. They were asked, how do you keep it fresh? Francesco Francavilla was asked if he had any complaints from Archie fans about killing off characters from Archie, which of course led to his humorous response that, well, nobody's really going away because they all come back as zombies. And they were asked, how do you know when you're getting to people? And then the last thing they talked about was they somehow got on the subject of insects like cockroaches and spiders, and other animals, and rabbits, and being freaked out by animals and other creatures. Anyway, it was a fun panel. I'm not a huge fan of horror films, like I think I said when I was talking about the Bee Sting movie. I'm not a big fan of horror films. I really do like horror comic books. I like some of the things they can do in horror comic books, some of the things that have been done in horror comic books. It was a good panel. I'm glad I went to it. Definitely worth my time. I will be posting the audio from it hopefully very soon after I post this particular recording. After that, I went back down to the floor. I wandered around some more. I spent a lot of time with the dealers looking for comic books. I bought one comic book. It only cost $2, and it was to fill in a gap. It was X-Men Classics #1, which I have issues 2 and 3. It was a 3-issue reprint series, which reprinted Neil Adams' run on X-Men, which only lasted about 8 issues, something like that, 10 issues, something like that, in the late 50s numbers, issues like 55 to 66 or something, somewhere along there. I had 2 and 3. I didn't have 1. Honestly, I have these comic books also in a collection of, I think it's X-Men Visionaries Neil Adams or something like that. But I really like the cover. The cover is by Mike Zeck. It's a beautiful cover. They had several copies of 2 and 3. They only had 1 copy of #1, so I bought it. I was tempted to buy some other comic books. They had some Silver Age Archies there. I don't know why I would buy Silver Age Archies. You see all these things and you think about picking something up. You just, I don't know. I find, and honestly, by the end of the day, I was really worn down because I kept on feeling the urge to buy things, to pick stuff up, to give people money. And I think I did a pretty good job of restraining myself. I obviously did spend money today on comic books. Well, actually, just the $2. $6 on comic books. The rest of it was on art. But it's still, it's very hard for me to resist. And by the end of the day, I really felt worn down. I don't know if it's because of that or what it is exactly that wears me down, that causes me to feel like I to feel so exhausted, or what it is that causes me to feel that I should be spending more money. You certainly have people constantly pitching stuff to you, whether it's and it's more so the creators who are pitching stuff to you than it is the retailers. The retailers have the signs, but they usually, take more of a weight, and they allow you to come to them. But the creators are the ones who try to engage you in conversation, and sometimes there's the opportunity to slip away, and sometimes you really want to buy something, or you really feel the urge to buy something, and I guess I'm really talking about myself here. I really feel the urge to buy something, and I really have to restrain myself and say no. But I don't know. I get this feeling like, but this would make me so happy if I bought this, and I really have to tell myself, no, I am happy. I don't need this to make me happy. So it's kind of crazy. I mean, there was definitely some stuff there I would have loved. There was a artist edition of some Mike Zeck comics, which I had seen advertised before. I didn't know how much this was going to cost. It was $195. There's no way I was spending $195 on that book. I don't care how beautiful it is. Now, obviously, an artist edition which reproduces the art in large size is obviously much less expensive than trying to buy original art. I mean, because obviously for the cost of maybe one page, you get an entire book of these enormous pages. But still, I can't justify buying all those. Every once in a while, I might be able to. And it is fun to browse, but I mean, honestly, this is part of the reason I think why I feel good about the fact that I've actually left the show for today and yesterday, the last couple days, and gone out and looked and for a bite to eat. And I don't feel bad about leaving the show. It's a relief to leave the show. It's nice to leave the show. So I had a good time today, but like I said, at the end of the day, I was very tired. I came straight back to the hotel, took care of some business, and then I went out to eat. I ate at a Smokehouse and McCoy's Smokehouse and Saloon, which isn't too far from here. Actually, it's right near the train station where I've been catching the Lynx train into town from. I gotta say, I wasn't crazy about it. The food was decent. It wasn't bad. But I guess what I found most disappointing, well, there was two things. Number one, I felt like I was moved in and out of there very quickly, which was a little surprising. If anything, sometimes you don't. Sometimes the service isn't fast. In this case, it felt like it was almost too fast. Like, I don't know, they just slapped everything together as soon as I ordered it. I don't know. The other thing was that the beer that I got was flat. Not completely flat, but it tasted off. Like it had been sitting around or something. Like, I don't know, maybe it had been in a pitcher and sitting out, or I don't know. Because it was supposed to be it was a Guinness Stout, and it was supposed to be, a draft. I don't know. But I didn't even finish my beer. I drank like 2/3 of it and left the rest, which I almost never do. So I don't know if I'm going to. It's certainly not high on my list of places to hit again. I had the pulled pork, which was decent, provided you put some sauce on it, because there was no sauce on the pulled pork. It was a pulled pork sandwich, and there was no sauce on the sandwich. The sandwich just had pulled pork and also some coleslaw on it. So I added some sauce, and that definitely added some moisture to the sandwich, and which was needed. But it was an okay meal. It just was not a great meal. Didn't blow me away. So I have one more day of Heroes Con. So tomorrow I pack up and I probably drive into town, and then I'll park downtown, which I probably should have done today, and I probably should do next year on Saturday, is drive in and park downtown, because the train ride downtown was just, I don't know, it just seemed way too slow. I don't know. Maybe the parking situation wouldn't be all that great downtown. But, and it was funny because there was these crazy lines inside the convention center for food, because I briefly considered going to the Bojangles in the convention center, and it was, 50, 100 people deep, the line for Bojangles. And then when I went to this restaurant, which was like 5-6 blocks away, there was nobody there, hardly anybody there. It's kind of funny how those things work. So I guess what I was getting at was, with the parking, if I try and park right next to the convention center, it would probably be nuts. But if I park 4 or 5 blocks away, I probably won't have any problem, which I think was my experience last year on Sunday. So overall, another good day. I'm looking forward to tomorrow. I need to study the program guide and figure out which panels I want to hit. I'm not staying to the bitter end, because maybe one of these years I'll stay Sunday night and stay to the very end of the show. But I'm not doing that this year, definitely not. I don't know if I'm going to eat lunch here or eat lunch on the road. I haven't decided that yet. So I guess, so I think that's about it for day one of Heroes Con. So far, this has been a great year. I've really been enjoying myself in ways that I hadn't the last time. Of course, the last time I got sick, and that always puts a damper on things. Last year I got sick on Saturday. I didn't spend as much time in panel rooms as I did last year. I did bring, a flannel shirt, which I definitely put on today, and I did the same thing yesterday, because some of those panel rooms are very cold. Some of them are not. Some of them are. And I guess I'm rambling at this point, and I should probably get to bed and get some sleep so I can get up and take care of stuff tomorrow morning, figure out where I'm going to eat breakfast, because I'm not sure if I'm going back to Tryon House for breakfast again tomorrow, or if I'm going to go somewhere else. I don't know. Maybe even somewhere downtown Charlotte. I don't know. But that's it for day one of Heroes Con. Following up on a couple things that I talked about on this episode, the graphic novel that Scott Fogg and Marc Thomas are working on is called Phileas Reid Knows We Are Not Alone. The name of the Star Trek-themed podcast that I mentioned earlier in the episode is Trecklenberg. And Neil Adams' run on the X-Men was X-Men issues 56 through 63 and issue 65. Issue 64 was a fill-in that was drawn by Don Heck, although interestingly enough, it was also the first appearance of Sunfire, who would later be, for a short time, a member of the X-Men when they were revived in the late 70s. That's it for episode 79 of Dave Talks Comics. Dave Talks Comics can be found on the web at davetalkscomics.com, and facebook.com/DaveTalksComics. On Twitter, @DaveTalksComics. Email can be sent to davetalkscomics@gmail.com. Next time on Dave Talks Comics, I'll be talking about Day 3 of Heroes Con and the beginning of my drive home. I'm Dave. Thank you for listening.